Well, hey there, hope you're doing well. We're getting started with this next session of Preaching Rocket Next in just a moment. My name is Matt Adair. I partner with the Rocket Company to help create training for you. And some of you have seen me on live webinars before, so hello, good to see you again. It's the first opportunity I've had to work with all of you in Preaching Rocket Next, so I'm looking forward to it. So as you're kind of getting in, getting settled, would love to just kind of get some information from you about where you're from and kind of where you're tuning in from. It always helps me know just a little bit of context in terms of who I'm working with today. Let me kind of give you my perspective and how this differs a little bit from some of the typical kind of big training webinars that we do, that I do personally, that I do with the Rocket Company, is that I really want to do two things. One is this should feel like you and I are sitting across the table. I've got my big Yeti full of coffee, and you have whatever it is that you're drinking this time of day, and we're just having a conversation. And today we're having a conversation about the mistakes that I see pastors make, mistakes I've made in reading, mistakes that I see other pastors make in reading, and how that directly impacts not just what you read, but how you preach as well. And so just imagine that we're kind of sitting across the table from one another. Maybe you're here in my office and we got the whiteboard behind me, and we'll just kind of be digging into the trenches. For me, the value in training like this is that we can get really tactical. We don't have to stay at high level again. We're doing this for you because you're part of this program. And so we're certainly not here to sell anything. We're here to add a ton of value because you've said that this is something that's going to be valuable for you. So we're going to get started here in just a second as everybody else is piling in. Again, my name is Matt Adair. I partner with the Rocket Company to do events like this. And so we can basically come in and help you continue to grow in areas of your life and ministry, including preaching. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and jump in and get off screen. I'm going to share my screen with you. Just going to walk you through this presentation. But again, we're going to try to do this in such a way where it feels pretty personal. So one of the things that you can do, make sure you're familiar with the chat box in the chat area, and make sure that you get in any questions that you have. And so I got my buddy Russell on here, and Russell's going to jump in and help us kind of work back and forth on questions, because we want to make sure that you leave this session today with all of your questions answered. And so my goal is really simple. I want to help you become more effective in your reading, and in doing that, I think it's going to help you in your preaching as well. Plus, we got a strategy that I think is really going to help you dive in. So enough talk to set this up. Let's go ahead and jump in here. And here we go. Well, first, let me get off screen here, y'all. Boom. All right, so again, what we're talking about today are 3 reading mistakes that pastors make. And first off, I just want to say thank you for being a part of Preaching Rocket Next. This is content that we are offering exclusively to you because you're part of the Preaching Rocket Next community. Again, as somebody who does a lot of one-on-one coaching, I think that this is an unbelievably valuable thing that you're doing, is you're basically having somebody come alongside of you and help you in your journey as a preacher. You've got community and support. So I think this is a really smart thing that you're doing right now. So thanks so much for being a part of that. My goal today, again, is really simple. If you're just jumping on, is that I want to help you develop a particular skill. I want to help you today get better in your reading. I think we all know that reading is unbelievably significant in our work as pastors and church leaders. Leaders are learners, and one of the most significant ways that we're going to learn is by reading. And so if you read a lot, great. If you struggle to read, maybe you even struggle with a learning disability. One of my best friends, one of the best leaders I know, has dyslexia, and when I've had to work with him, and we've worked together in trying to help him learn in a way that's going to take advantage of some of the strengths he has that may not show up in the same way that it does for other people when it comes to learning and reading. So my goal is to help you have a particular skill that you develop that's going to help you as a reader. Now, what makes this different is a couple of things, I think. One, again, is this is not kind of high-level 35,000-foot view, kind of take the cover off of a problem type of training. This is dig into the details, very tactical, step-by-step. And so I want to do everything that I can to make this absolutely obvious and clear about what you should do to grow in this particular area, okay? And another thing that makes us different is me, the fact that not only am I doing this, but the fact that I, like you, I am also a pastor. I am the lead pastor of Christ Community Church in Athens, Georgia. I've been here since 2004, and so this summer I'll celebrate my 13th anniversary. And so that is an unbelievable evidence of God's grace to me, that a group of people have allowed me to be part of what they're doing for the last 12, 13 years. I also work a lot with helping church leaders make the most out of all that God has given them. That's why I get up every day. It affects the why I want to raise my kids, how I want to lead my church, and why I show up in places like this and have conversations like this for you. I want to help you make the most out of all that God has given you. And that includes your work as a preacher, and that includes this particular skill set of being a reader. Now, I have over 20 years of experience preaching myself. I personally coached more than 75 preachers in the last 12 months from multiple different countries. I do own every issue of Guitar World magazine from 1991 to 1996. But what I didn't say there is I actually can't play guitar. It's one of those things that I can't imagine being that bad at anything to get started, so I never got started. And so we like to have a joke about that with our band, that I know more about guitars than they do, but I can't play a lick. So that's a me issue. And so there's me being honest and vulnerable with you. There's part of my family, my wife, Lindsay. We've been married for 18 years. My 12-year-old son, Jonathan, this was actually taken on a birthday trip that we took with him this year for his 12th birthday. Jonathan is the world's foremost expert in Looney Tunes. I'm absolutely convinced of that. He's read more than 40 books. He's watched all the episodes. He knows not only the characters, he knows the art directors, he knows the release dates. And so we took him to a really great museum exhibit in Huntsville, Alabama in November. And so that's a picture from us doing that up there. So my family, always a great reminder for me of why I do this, because I know you have families, you care about them the way that I care about mine. And so we're simpatico here, and that there's things that we care deeply about, including our families, including preaching. Now, here's what I want to convince you of today and persuade you, against all odds, perhaps, because you may look at a statement like this and think this is crazy, but I believe that you can read more by reading less. I believe that you can read more by reading less. Now, let me tell you a little bit of my journey as a reader. My mom tells me that I first began reading when I was 3. I've always enjoyed reading. But when I got into ministry back in the mid-90s, it was the day in which kind of Christian book distributors, they were really sending out catalogs all the time. And so, man, I was just wanting to learn everything that I possibly could. And so I would just grab books, like anything that looked remotely interesting. I was trying to find a way to buy it. I can remember the very first Christmas that I spent with my in-laws. The way that Christmas lists work in my family is that you created a big list, and then people had, the ability to choose some things off of that list. Like, you wouldn't get everything on the list, so there were some surprises, but you kind of helped create the surprise and not be completely disappointed because they were giving you stuff that you had said that you might like. So I did that with my new in-laws. And so here's this big, long list of books, because I was a first-year seminary student the year that we got married. And so I had this long list of books. It was just hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of dollars of books. And but I just figured that they just pick a few of those, and I'd get those, and that would be cool. Well, what I wasn't expecting is that my mother-in-law just decided she'd buy all of them. And so I was just surrounded by library full of books. And so I was just grabbing stuff randomly. And then I wouldn't tell you that I really had a strategy. I didn't really care what would happen when I read a book. I just figured that I would accumulate a bunch of knowledge, and somehow that would be able to kind of translate into something useful for ministry. And so therefore I suffer the consequences, and the consequences are real simple. I have a lot of books and in my library, some of which I've read, some of which I've half read, some of which I read a couple pages, got distracted by some other book. And so the consequences are I have a library full of books, some of which I may know what they actually say, but most of which I don't. Now, what I found over the years is that while that's not a really great story, that doesn't reflect great on me, I'm not alone. I find that so many people in ministry and leadership have a very similar story, that we've accumulated a lot of books, we've read them, but we can't necessarily remember what we read. And so what did we actually gain? And so I just want to say that maybe you're starting your journey as a preacher and you hear my story, random book collection, random approach to reading, minimal results, some real consequences. And I just want to say, don't do that. Let's come up with a better strategy and a different approach to reading that will be more helpful for you. So here's what you're going to learn. I want to share with you a strategy that I'm convinced will help you read at least one more book per week. Now, this is not some kind of speed reading thing. That's not what you're about to learn, okay? So this is a strategy that will help you read at least one more book per week and is actually going to help you retain the information in a way that is significant, that you're actually going to be able to remember what you read in the books that you read, okay? So that's our goal. That's what we're after today. So you hold me to this, okay? And feel free to challenge me on the point as we dig into this, but that's what I'm here to try to persuade you of, okay? So here's what reading looks like in real life, all right? This is what is true for most of us. And most people, this is how reading happens. One, we pick a book fairly randomly. We either see that it's a new author that we like, it's a brand new book by our favorite author. So bam, we're going to pick it up, whether or not we necessarily need it. You're going to see a topic that's particularly interesting. And man, we have things like Amazon Prime, and it's really easy to order stuff just kind of on a whim. And so we pick a book randomly. And then we have the book in front of us. We either have it, a hard copy, we have it on our Kindle, we have it on a tablet of some kind. And we know that if you're going to read a book, you start at the beginning. And then you are supposed to read every word, right? And you're supposed to start at the beginning and end at the end. And if you somehow finish that, which my guess is that we probably read about half of the books that we have halfway through. And so I don't know about you, but again, my library and a lot of my friends' libraries have books with all these little like note cards and tabs out the top where they haven't actually finished reading those books. So you barely remember what you read. Some of us could walk through our library right now and pick up almost any random book. And if you were to say, what was the main point of that book? Like you could say very little other than kind of a vague regurgitation of the title. So I'm looking over here in my library and here's The Mission of God by Chris Wright. And you just pick up and go, well, what is that book about? And you go, well, it's about God's mission in this world. That's about all you remember. And I think that we want to retain more than we actually do, but in the end, we really don't. So let's go back to this and say, why did you pick up the book in the first place? Now, some of us read certain books for leisure, and I'm just going to go ahead and tell you right now that I'm not talking here about fiction. I'm not here addressing those type of books. I think those are very valuable for pastoral ministry. I'm talking things that are more technical, stuff that's more wired for theology, leadership practices, commentaries, anything that's related to a subject that we might be preaching on. So more books like that. So my guess is usually when you pick up those kind of books, that there's something in particular you're trying to learn. You're trying to learn what a biblical text actually says. You're trying to get greater understanding of a particular theological concept. And so I think it's really important for us to go back and say, why are we doing this in the first place? We're not doing this just to finish a book. We're actually picking up a book because we want to learn, right? So my hope is that we can really think of a better way to learn in our reading. So I just really want to walk through 3 mistakes that I think we make as pastors and preachers when we read. And so as we dig into this, I think here's where you're going to be able to kind of jump in with questions and really help add value to this, not only for yourself, because I'm addressing what you need to hear, but you'll also be helping out other people as well who are on here. So again, we're trying to do this as a community. So don't be stingy with your questions. Go ahead and get them in, and we're going to have a couple of rounds of Q&A. So here's the first mistake. I think the first mistake that we make is that we have to read every word in order to get the most out of what we read. We can blame our English teachers growing up on this one, right? Because the expectation was if they hand you Trumpet and the Swan, if they hand you Charlotte's Web, as you get older, if they hand you the Scarlet Letter, if they hand you this book, that book, or whatever, that you're supposed to start at the beginning and end at the end, and you need to read every word if you're going to get the most out of what you read. Now, here's my conviction. I think only a handful of words really matter in most books. And I don't mean that as an indictment on the author or the publisher. I don't think people are filling it with fluff. What I'm saying is, in the moment in which you're reading this particular book, for you, only a handful of words really matter, because you are looking for a help in a particular way, in a particular place. You're looking for a particular skill set out of a book filled with potential skill sets. You're looking at one theological concept in a book that's maybe filled with theological concepts. And so if you approach a book that way and are convinced that only a handful of words really matter, therefore I've got to go find which words actually do matter, that's going to significantly help you in your reading. So the words that actually are going to help you are things like this: chapter titles. Like, so often I think we just jump in at the beginning and we don't even have a sense of like, what is this book going to cover? And so chapter title should give you some sense of what you're going to see. You know, what kind of journey is the author going to take you on? Headings and subheadings. This isn't true in every book, but a lot of books do a great job in basically giving you kind of a bird's eye view of the content of any chapter using the headings and the subheadings that are there. And then significant passages. So once you kind of understand, here are the chapter titles, and then you find maybe one chapter and that becomes interesting to you, and then you dig into the headings and subheadings and find, oh, there's the question that I've been trying to answer. They're going to address this particular point of theology, this particular biblical text. Then I want to go jump in and begin reading all that I can there, but that's going to be what matters most to me. All right, so I would say that the first mistake that we make is this conviction and this idea that we need to pick up a book and start at the beginning and end at the end. Now, again, the trick here is that I think we know that that's true when you're looking at something like a commentary, when you're preaching, you know, the 10 Commandments in Exodus, and you know that you don't need to look at the beginning of Exodus or the end of Exodus necessarily. You just need to jump into that particular chapter in the book of Exodus where you're going to address and see them talk about the 10 Commandments. But I do find that other kind of books that we read, when it's covering a particular subject and the entire book is on one particular theological concept, we're still treating everything as equally important, when the truth is what I really need right now is maybe one thread, one plank of a particular theological argument, and I need to jump in there. So what we're really talking about here is by really growing and developing our reading, by honing in and focusing on what matters most. So that's the first mistake. And again, this is where you want to be getting your questions in. Anything that you want me to go dive into deeper and talk about more, that's going to be a really good question for you to ask, all right? Here's mistake number 2. Mistake number 2 is that you learn by reading words. Now, that's going to seem confusing until you see what I mean by that, and that is that you learn by engaging with the words that you actually read. So one of the things that could be dangerous that I said earlier is, I'm going to give you a strategy for being able to read at least one more book per week than you do now. Now, I think you know this, and you can see this by what I'm saying here, is that you don't get any points by just reading words. Like, what really matters is your ability to engage with the words that you read. I went to Beeson Divinity School in Birmingham, and my church history professor was a man named Gerald Bray. Gerald has written several really good books and commentaries. You should have everything that he has ever written. But Dr. Bray was notorious for his ability to not just plow through a stack of 50-page papers in a night, like 30 of those in one night, but he would actually have made very salient comments in the margins of your paper. So he didn't just fly through them, he actually engaged with them. And that's what was astounding, is that in just that kind of time, he could get that done. But what we have to realize is that what made that meaningful for all of us as his students was not just his speed, but his ability to actually engage with what he was doing, because that's what counts. And for you, when you're reading, you have to be able to engage with what you read, right? So how do we do that? So here's what I do. And let me kind of share with you my practice and how this has worked for me. And it's been very, very helpful for the last 5, 6, 7 years. Number one is I just have a stack of 3x5 note cards that are close by. And so I just have a good supply of them. And so I like to read physical books, especially when I'm trying to get into technical stuff like the things that we're talking about here. And so I'll just have a stack of note cards close by. And then what I want to do is I want to focus on the words that I'm reading. And so I'll simply use that note card, and I'll just put it underneath the line that I'm actually reading. Some of you probably do something like this already, but it just simply trains and focuses your eyes on the words that you're paying attention to right then. Now, again, what have I done? I've gone from chapter titles to headings and subheadings, and now I'm focused on a particular thing that I really feel like I have to learn. So how do I learn it? Well, I need to engage with it. And so I'll have that notebook, and then and I'll have that note card in that book, and so I'll just begin to ask questions, and I'll write those questions down as I'm reading. And so I want to make sure that I am not moving too far away from the book. It's why I don't even use a separate notebook here. I just simply write the questions on the note card as I'm doing the reading. So I'm just basically moving from the page to the note card that's right there. I'm not even taking my eyesight, really, my sight of vision off of that book. I'm still in the book, and I'm asking questions. I may be arguing against a point. Maybe I'm elaborating on a point that they make. And then when I fill up a note card, I just grab a new one, and I start over and do the same process until I'm done reading what I need to read. And then when I'm done, I move that conversation, that stack of note cards, and I basically I transcribe everything over into a notebook. Now, you might think that takes a ton of time. It really doesn't, because sometimes I'll use shorthand. Some questions that I wrote down, I won't want to keep and continue. But I would say that probably if I read for 30 minutes, that maybe 5 minutes of that 30 minutes I'm going to be using to do this right here. Now, what I do with this is that I usually will move that conversation, what's in those note cards. What I've started doing is I will actually take a picture of those note cards and put it in Evernote. So I have Evernote files that have basically, I don't even have to rewrite everything. I'm just taking pictures of it, and then I'm putting it in Evernote, and so that's where I'll keep those things. But if you're using a Moleskine or if you're using a paper notebook, then you just simply rewrite those things there. And so again, the reason I like that is, one, I'm not taking my view off of the book when I'm taking the notes, when I'm asking questions, I'm elaborating on a point, I'm arguing a point. But then when I go back and I rewrite those things into that notebook, then it kind of reinforces what I've learned. It's another way for me to drill down on that. So again, what are you doing? You're engaging with the content, and you're reinforcing what you're learning. And so what happens is because you've had better focus, you're going to increase significantly your ability to retain what you're actually learning. And so to me, that practice, which has some steps, and you have to be have some discipline to do that. If it basically takes a little bit more time, it's going to create a lot more value because you've increased your focus and you've increased your retention. And so again, I think the mistake that we're trying to avoid is just simply starting at the beginning of a book, reading through the book, or even grabbing a particular passage and just kind of reading passively. Like we're just basically letting our eyes scan over some words, and we think that we're actually learning, when the truth is all we're doing is just skimming over some words. And so I want to help you grow as a reader by engaging with the words that you have there. So again, this is where you want to get questions in. This is where you want to ask me to go back and go dig in deeper. And what does that look like? And how does that actually play itself out? Now, what I want to do in mistake number 3, when we talk about trying to retain too much the wrong way, is this is when we're going to get really, really granular. And this is when I'm going to put some of this together that we've seen in mistakes 1 and 2. And you're going to see the exact strategy that I use to be able to put all of this together. But the third mistake is us trying to do all of this in such a way that we feel like we're just going to be able to take this tactic, and we're just going to be able to learn. And so I think there's a lot of value in using the note cards and engaging with the text and doing all of that. But how do you actually walk away with it and retain it? How do you actually know what's the content of any particular book that you've read? So I want to show you how we do this. But first, when you think about the idea of learning all this stuff, you know, as you read 16 different commentaries on a passage, like how are you going to remember what in the world you actually read? It's kind of like the prospect of memorizing a manuscript, you know? So if you have 40,000 words, you know, in a sermon, it's a pretty big sermon, right? But I want you to imagine the task of trying to memorize all of those words. And one of the things that I've had to do for myself, because I preach without notes, and one of the things that I've done with guys that I try to coach through this is try to figure out a better way than trying to memorize every single thing that you put down on paper, because one of the worst ways for you to memorize anything is for you to basically put black ink on white paper and for you to just try to memorize what's there, because it all looks the same. Now, some of us might have photographic memory. Most of us don't, and so we've got to find a better way to retain what we've learned, and so that's what I want to help you with. And so here's what I found, that the best way to remember content that you're reading, and then I'm going to show you how this impacts your preaching, is a concept called mind mapping, okay? So I'm going to click out of this for just a second, and I actually want to show you. Here is a mind map. This is one that we're going to look at in a book that I want to share with you and tell you about. But this is what a mind map actually looks like, all right? So it's very, very simple. And I'll walk you back through this in just a minute, but essentially this is a way that you visually organize information. And so what's going to help you retain this is the fact that you are working radially, and so that's the way that your brain's going to remember this, and you're using different colors, and you're just using very short phrases to be able to retain the information that you are looking at. So the particular book that I am going to walk you through is a book called The Christ-Centered Expositor by my friend Tony Merida. And so this is a book that's got several hundred pages on it. I basically summarized that entire book right here. And we're going to walk exactly through how we do that in just a minute. But this is a mind map. And so when we talk about mind mapping, we're talking about a diagram that we use to visually organize information. Now, some of you have used mind mapping before. For some of you, this is the first time you've ever seen it, okay? So a mind map is created around a single concept, the big idea. And so you're basically working off of that. So if you were going to create a mind map on how to play tennis, then you might have, a picture of two tennis rackets in the middle of your picture. But that's the concept. Like, you want to have a way to know this is what we're talking about. And I'm going to show you how to do that when you read a book here in just a minute. And then you basically take the major ideas of what you're reading and you want to connect it to a core concept. And so that kind of gives you that radial effect that we were talking about earlier. So what you have when you're looking at the mind map is you have this set of ideas. So there's a major idea, there's a major idea, there's a major idea, there's a major idea. And so you just see that these big hooks here, the things that you really want to pay attention to, that's right here in the middle. And then you're going to have these kind of secondary branches, which are going to kind of unpack this main idea. And so when you talk about here, for instance, we talk about this section of the book, the expositor's heart. That's an entire section of this book, and here are some of the chapters. So we're talking about everything from watching your life in doctrine to relying on the Spirit's power to preaching and teaching for God's glory. So these secondary branches right here should basically play off the main branch and help you remember what we're talking about in this area. And then you have other branches which you can use to unpack further content. So when you want to talk about how to cultivate a vibrant prayer life, then you can jump in here and you can look at some of these. And so I'll show you how this works in a book in just a minute. But right now I want to make sure that you understand the concept of mind mapping itself. And so when you're mind mapping, you've got these major ideas that are connected to a core concept, and then you're just basically using additional ideas and branching them out from there. So you're just using words, you're using phrases. Some people like to basically draw pictures. They like to do this and create these visually, and I think that can be very effective. I'm not that creative, so I tend to just use words and phrases. But mind mapping, I think, is really a fantastic way for you to retain the information that you're learning. And so what I want to do is I want to walk you step by step through the process of mind mapping when you read, okay? And again, as we go through this, continue to get your questions in, and we're going to have a big, long Q&A section here in just a minute. But I want to go step by step through how this works exactly. Again, the book that I'm using is the book called The Christ-Centered Expositor by Tony Merida. Tony is a pastor. He is a professor at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary in Wake Forest, North Carolina. And so is a guy that I have the utmost respect for, is a good friend. And so if you don't have a copy of that book, you should get it. But I'm going to walk you through this, okay? So this is how you use mind mapping when you read, okay? So the first step is to choose your medium. You can do a mind map on a whiteboard. You can do this on paper. You can do it digitally. What I do is I do this digitally. And so the program that I use right now is a program called MindNode. You can get it, I'm using a Mac here. You can get it on the Mac operating system. You can get it on iOS, and it works seamlessly between those two platforms. And so you pick whichever one you want to use, but you choose your medium first. We got to get that one out of the way, all right? And then the second step is basically you want to put at the center of your mind map the core concept. And the cheat and the hack on this is basically to read the summary of the book and find, what is this book about? And so you can see this in this particular mind map that, the book's called the Christ-Centered Expositor, and basically it is to help you become effective at expository preaching. That is the summary. That is the win. What is the Christ-Centered Expositor about? How to become effective at expository preaching. And so you put that concept right in the middle, and so now we know what the book is actually about. So once you have that down, then you can move on from there and develop your main branches. And what are you going to build off of that core concept? And so what you can do is use either chapter titles or headings. And I like this book because it does both on this. And let me show you that the main branches and the headings are two things. One, here, this is just an introductory chapter, all right? And the conclusion and appendices, they're kind of their own thing as well. What you have here are two sections in the book. So the book has an introduction, two main sections here, the expositor's heart and the expositor's message. And then once you have surrounding this, like the expositor's heart right over here, like these are the chapters. So technically this is chapter 1, but then this is chapters 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, but it's all part of this big, massive section called the expositor's heart. And so I can look at this and go that there are 4 basic ideas here that they're trying to get. If you want to be effective in your expository preaching, then you're really focusing on the heart and the message, okay? You've got an introduction here, you got a conclusion here, but I know that that's what he's after here. He wants to talk about the expositor's heart, the heart of the preacher, and the message of the preacher, okay? So now when I go through that and I basically go to the table of contents and I get that, then it takes me 5 minutes in any book to get a high-level view of what this book is about. So what's happened is that I have this little wrestling match with a book that when I see a book and I'm interested in it, then I kind of want to fight against my natural urge just to buy it. And so first I want to go read the summary. And if that interests me, then I'm okay buying it. Now I've bought it. I have the book. How do I know if I should spend my valuable time reading this book? Well, first, I want to go look at all the chapters, and I want to see, based on those chapter titles and headings, whether or not this is something that I should actually spend my time on. And if I have bought a book and I look at the chapter titles, and this happens every now and then, I just go, you know what? I just don't think this is really helpful right now. Maybe this is a book I need to put on my shelf, and I need to read it some other time, but not right now. Then great. Then I didn't invest a bunch of time and energy on something I didn't need. But in 5 minutes, I can really get a good sense of what this book is going to be about. So for instance, for this book, we know that it's about the heart and the message of the preacher. So now we have our main branches. The 4th step is to build out the secondary branches. And that, again, is the main headings of selected chapters. Now, what I've done here in this mind map is that I've taken 3 chapters and showed you kind of how we might do this. So you can look at, first off, this introduction chapter right here, the making of an effective expositor. And when you go through that, you can look, and these are this kind of the subheadings underneath that, okay? What makes a good preacher and teacher? What does the Bible say about preaching and teaching? Definitions and distinctions, so on. So these are all the headings that are there in that particular chapter. And then I came down here, and I wanted to do the same thing with cultivating a vibrant prayer life. So maybe you jump into this book and you want to get a sense of what the book is all about. So you take the first introductory chapter and you look at those headings, and you look at this section on the heart and you go, watch your life and doctrine. That's interesting. Love the Christ-centered scriptures, all the way that. But you get down to cultivating a vibrant prayer life as a preacher, and that just seems to be like where you want to dig into. And so what you do before you just go actually start reading the chapter, you go through this and you go, okay, well, so what are the headings here? Examples of faithful prayer, content of faithful prayer, hindrances to faithful prayer, more practical tips on prayer. And so now I've just outlined it. And so maybe that's going to be really helpful to make me, help me kind of decide whether or not I want to jump in or whether I want to kind of maybe just pass on that. And then another chapter that I jumped into over here was this one right here on unifying the redemptive theme. Now this one was pretty thick here. So what I did is I basically came in here and I grabbed those main sections, identifying the main point of the text, developing the main point of the sermon, adding a title that reflects the main point of the sermon, and then the summary here. And I'll tell you about why we got more over here in just a minute, but that's what we've done. So we've started off with this big idea of the book, then we've gone in with these main branches, which tell us what the book is really about. Then we walk through the chapter titles, and we go in and we find basically the chapters that are interesting to us, and we walk through the headings of those chapters to really see what we need to focus on and what's really going to matter most to us at this point. Now, again, what we've done here is we've essentially been able to take a very high-level view and in a handful of minutes explore areas of interest. So now I know what the chapters are about, and then when I see a chapter that interests me, I can basically take 5 minutes in that chapter and see if that chapter on prayer is really, if it seems like he's going to say something that's worth my time. So again, we're cutting down the time you're spending because you're doing the work of preparing. You're doing kind of preparation before you read so that you don't waste your time when you actually jump into whatever it is that you do want to read. Hope that makes sense. Now here's the fifth step. The fifth step is the smaller branches, and these are chapter details. This is once you begin to unpack the details of what you're looking at, and this is when you want to begin unpacking and looking at the details of a particular chapter. So here's what I did on this one. So let's go back to this chapter on the redemptive theme in a sermon. So I felt like that would be important so that when I'm getting to this idea of what a sermon is actually about, that I want to make sure I'm doing a good job in communicating a theme that's going to get to the heart of the good news we call the gospel. And so what I've done is I've gone through over here and I've basically identified, here are the headings in that chapter because you can see them very clearly in the book if you were to read through it. And then what I want to do is I want to basically go through there and I want to summarize. I want to basically not read word for word yet. I'm just going through and I'm skimming this section on identifying the main point of the text. And I'm just following along with words that are in italics, like this phrase is in italics, that the main point of the text is the text in historic context, and it's always going to be in the past tense. It's how I'm going to communicate the main point of the text. And then he's going to have a section where he talks about why, and I'm going to look for words that are underlined, things that are italicized. If he's going to go, I give you 3 reasons why, then I'm going to go find those 3 reasons based on what's there in the book. So I'm not reading word for word yet, but I am getting more detailed. I'm getting more in the weeds because this is the kind of stuff that I feel like I absolutely need to get right now. And then I go ahead and I do that for these other sections as well. So developing the main point of the sermon, 3 questions, and you go in and you have those. And so you're getting a good outline of the book, but you're not having to go in and read it and engage with it yet. You're just getting a good overview of what's happening here. And so he just walks you through finding the main point of the text, developing the main point of the sermon, adding a title, and then he summarizes it there. And now I can look at this chapter and go, this is exactly what I've been looking for. And I think it's going to be good for me to go back now that I have kind of a high-level view of this and be able to go in and find exactly what I need. And that's the part that I'm going to read. Maybe it's the entire chapter. Maybe it's just the main point of the sermon because I feel like I've got a good sense of how to do main point of the text. But this is kind of a new idea for me. And so this is what I'm going to spend my time reading today. Instead of trying to read all of this, I'm just basically coming in and I'm just identifying that one section right there. So I think you can see how that framework works and the benefit of that. But again, what we're doing there is you're digging in the dirt for maybe 10 minutes. So in 20 minutes, 25 minutes, I've been able to go from opening a book for the first time to finding the exact part of that book that I need to read. Now, you may have multiple parts of that book you need or want to read, but if you are trying to make sure that you have focus and get the most out of your reading, this is a fantastic way to do that. So again, the mistake that I think that we make and the mistake that I think we can avoid is by trying to retain too much the wrong way. So maybe this changes the way you take notes. Maybe this changes the way that you try to remember what you've learned. Some of us may have big, long notebooks and elaborate outlines, and maybe those things are helpful for you. But if you're in a place where you just feel stuck and you can't actually remember anything that you wrote down, you've invested time and energy into very elaborate outlines, then maybe mind mapping is going to be really helpful for you. All right. Now we get to questions. Now we get to dig in to where I can help you. So this is the place where I want to get really, really tactical. So I've tried to get pretty detailed, and so hopefully we'll be able to come in and help you in particular places. So I want Russell to jump in here, and let's see what questions we have and how we can help you out.
Yeah, that was so great. My mind is a little bit blown at how practical and awesome that's going to be as we're reading through books. We did have a question from Craig. He was asking, I think you called it a medium, but are there specific like apps or softwares that you use for mind mapping, or is this like a pencil and paper, or did you make your own like drawing?
Yeah, I think the universe just laughed when they heard somebody say, "Did I create this on my own?" No, it is a fantastic program called MindNode. You can go get it in the App Store. It may be in Google, might be there. I just know it's on the Apple platform. So I've used others in the past. They're all fairly similar. The reason I liked MindNode, a couple of reasons. One is because it's very simple and easy to use, and the interface in between platforms. So I'll actually show you that in just a minute, how easy it was for me to use this in moving it from my iPad to my desktop.
Perfect. Another question, how many different books do you think that you can like read and retain, like say in a year's time doing this? And then to elaborate on that a little more, do you do this with multiple books at a time, or do you try and like do one book at a time with this method?
I think what I've found is that it allows me to not have to jump back and forth with books at a time. So what I'll do, so let's get really practical in terms of sermon preparation. So we've got a series coming up on marriage that starts on March 5th. And so here's my stack of books that I want to look at. I want to read from kind of different people and different perspectives. So what I would have done in the past is I would have done this kind of weird, elaborate thing where you've got books open and tabs, little sticky notes here and there and all that kind of stuff. But what I've found, what's developed for me over the past 5 years, is I will basically start with the book that I think is most interesting. And I will just look at that, and I'll do this process with that book at a very high level. We'll usually just do nothing but summary and chapter titles, and I'll do that for all the books that I have. And so what that allows me to do is to really see who's talking about what, and maybe what jumps out to me in that process, what kind of triggers something off, and then I can go back through and really find the books that I think are going to be most helpful for me in those particular areas. So I think you can do it with multiple books, but for me, I just found it just really simple to go in and get my summary and chapter headings pretty quickly, and then I may just move on from there.
Okay, great. How many books do you think that you've done this with, or in your experience, how many books have you done it with, like in a year or a month, say?
I think a little bit of it does depend on your rate of speed and your rate of learning. So I think there's a little bit of an X factor there. I mean, I probably do read a book a week this way. I mean, so what I'm trying to do is I'm increasingly becoming a believer in the fact that if you can get to the heart of a particular book, and so if there's going to be book summaries out there, great. Then I want to take advantage of those. You can take a process like this. So so what I would say is, don't limit yourself by what I'm saying or overwhelm yourself by what I'm saying. I would simply go start with the book that seems most significant to you right now, and then go through this process, try it, and then see how quickly you get done. If it takes you an entire week, great. If it takes you a day, cool. And then you're able to move on to the next one. And then in terms of retention, it really depends on what you want to retain. And we'll get into this when we talk about preaching in just a minute. That this is the practice that I use to get up and preach 40-minute sermons every week for the last 6-7 years and not take anything up there but a Bible. So your ability to retain, I think, because of the way in which you're just learning phrases, not entire passages, you're really learning radially. So the way that mind map kind of circles around, and then just the different color schemes that are involved in that, I think they all help retain it. So I guess it's a long answer for me to say I don't know, but that's kind of what it's worked out for me, is that I'm probably at about a book a week where I'm getting all the way down into some passages that I'm actually engaging with pretty significantly.
Awesome. And like you said, I think it's a learned thing, and using that MindNode, and the more you've done it, I'm sure the faster you've gotten, the more books you've been able to go through. And Craig was saying that he was able to find the software, which was awesome.
Great.
And that he just actually recently got a stack of books for an upcoming series.
Awesome.
And had no idea how he was going to be able to walk through them. So
yeah,
now thankful that you've been able to walk us through this.
That's great. That's fantastic. Well, that's good. That's good. So let's do this. We're going to do one more round of Q&A here. So keep your questions coming. Here's what I want to do is I want to give you a little bit of bonus here. And I want to basically show you how to do this for preaching. And so I don't want you to have to kind of guess at how you're going to make those connections. I want to show you exactly how you make this happen. And I'm going to show you one of actually my mind map from last Sunday. So again, let's go through the steps and I'll show you how this plays out. You're going to choose your medium: whiteboard, paper, digital. I've used all of them. I do like using digital. I like the MindNode app because I can go back and forth between my iPad, my phone, my desktop, all those things, all right? And then again, you basically want to have your core concept. What's the main point of the sermon? Sometimes I'll do that. Sometimes I'll just put the text that I'm in. That may be just a starting place and an anchor for me. But I want to start with that. That's at the middle of the mind map. As a matter of fact, let me go ahead and just bring this up here now. So this is from last Sunday. And so I was preaching Proverbs chapter 3, really focusing on verses 5 and 6, but went all the way down into verse 11 and 12. And so I just put that right there in the middle. So this is kind of the code that I have, sort of the default. So Proverbs, we printed, I think, chapter 3, verse 1, went all the way through verse 12. And this is from February 12, 2017. So that's kind of my code that I keep with all my files. And so basically what you're seeing is a 40-minute message that basically just went this way. And so we'll dig into this in just a minute, what this looks like. But this is what I created, and this is what I was able to put together in a lot faster time than creating a manuscript, certainly. And then what allows me to basically go up with nothing but my Bible. And so I will say this, for me, the reason that I preach without notes is a couple of reasons. Two is I think it gives me what I would say, it gives me the best opportunity to communicate most powerfully with the people that we have in that room with me. It allows me to make eye contact the whole time. I think there's something about somebody being up there and just having their Bible that at least makes it appear, and I hope it's real, that we actually have this message, not just in our head, but in our heart. And then I think for me, it is also the most practical way that I depend on the Holy Spirit. Because you just saw that. I showed you that it was a 40-minute sermon that maybe had a tenth of the words that I would actually use. And so there's a lot of me having to trust the Holy Spirit to actually lead and guide my words. And sometimes that's scary. And sometimes I get real nervous that I'm going to, lose that fantastically awesome statement that I've got, that I would have had underlined and highlighted in my manuscript. I got to make sure that I remember it and I say it well. And so that's a couple of reasons to even consider something like this. But so once I have that core concept, then my main branches are going to be kind of the big movements in my sermon. And so this is going to be a little bit different for different people. But for me, what this looks like is that I'm usually going to have some kind of introduction right here where I'm really trying to kind of provoke sort of a big question. So the big question for us was really going to get into this idea of we're going to talk about the choices we make and how the Holy Spirit helps us. That's what this series is, on practically how do we experience the Holy Spirit. And so here's what we're talking about today. So I'm just priming the pump for this conversation about our decision making and the will of God and how the Holy Spirit's involved in that. And then I really want to dig into the text right here. So this kind of movement right here. So God invites us to trust him from the bottom of our heart. That's Proverbs 3, verse 5. And so all of this is basically an exposition of Proverbs 3. And I'm doing certain things in here. There's illustrations here. There's a little bit of application that's built in here. I talked about 3 questions that you need to ask as you're trying to determine kind of what type of decision this is and how you interact with the scriptures there. But that's kind of what this is, all right? For me, normally, this is when I do the bulk of my exposition and unpacking of a text. And then this main branch over here is primarily going to be application. And so we got real practical in this one. I gave them a framework for how you make any big decision in 3 weeks or less. Okay, so we got real practical here. And then on the 4th one, this is really want to drive everything back to Jesus, where I'm going to basically kind of bring us to the end of our own ability and basically like, here's why we have to rely on the passive and active work of Jesus in our lives. And so we really jumped in here. So those are the basic movements that I have there, right? So I know along the way that I'm going to be making these turns in my message. And so those are all captured in that mind map and those main branches. And then what I'm going to do after that is everything else is just kind of reinforcing the big movement. It's essentially the conversation that you're going to have, what you would have in an outline, what you would have in your manuscript, but I'm just trying to break it down into words and phrases that are organized radially so that I can basically, in my own head and kind of in sort of the eyes of my mind, if you will, I can kind of see that message as I'm preaching it. So those main branches are your big movements, and then the secondary branches are going to reinforce your introduction, your exposition, your application, and then you're driving to the real heart of the gospel there. And then the other branches that are off of that are just details. And that may be just, again, here's the way that I want to introduce this. Here's the way that I want to apply this. Here's the way that I want to illustrate this. And so just different ways there. So I would say probably for me, what happens is probably somewhere between maybe about a tenth of what I'm actually going to say is going to show up in that mind map. But it's the same concept that we had. So everything is basically starting from the middle and really driving to this main idea. And then what we're doing here is really digging in here. So the way that in which I'm going to preach this is it's kind of like this. And I'm going to come here, and then I'm going to preach all the way through this down here to the bottom. And then we'll jump here, and I'll say all that. And then I'll jump here, and I'll say all that. And that's where I'm going to land the plane. So that's a basic way in which you can use this for preaching, using that same concept that we did for reading. Your main branches, your secondary branches, all attached to this core idea and this core text. So a lot of ways you could do this. That's some of the stuff that I've done. So that's why, that's one of the reasons we brought this in for preaching and for Preaching Rocket Next, is because not only are we talking about how you read to kind of reinforce what you're preaching, but this is a way that you can actually help you maybe get a little bit less dependent upon your manuscript if that's something that you've been wanting to do for a while. So I think this is the best strategy to do that. So any questions about kind of mind mapping related to preaching, maybe even going back to that concept for reading, want to make sure that we have space for that if you have any questions.
Yeah, so the first question was, is there ever a time to use fiction in sermon prep? And if you were to use fiction, would you use the mind mapping technique, you think, or just pull examples?
Yeah, I mean, I think fiction can be a little bit tricky because it usually isn't broken up as linearly. Sometimes you can get that from chapters. I think absolutely you should use fiction. I think stories are so powerful as illustrations, and sometimes really reinforcing what we're doing in our explanation. So use it, yes. I've just found that it's usually not as helpful for me using the mind mapping technique. But I think you could still apply it. I've just found that with fiction, I'm usually wanting to enjoy it. So one of the things that I'll have people ask me is, what about just reading for enjoyment? And I'm like, well, go for that. Like, if you're reading for enjoyment, then just do whatever it looks like for you to enjoy it. But if you're trying to read to actually learn, then that may be different. The closest thing that I found to this for not fiction but narrative is biography. Like I do think you could do mind mapping with biography, because usually the chapters are organized in such a way that you can kind of track what they're talking about. But what you're not going to get into are some of the stories. If you're reading a biography of George Washington, you might see Valley Forge and go, well, I know I want to read Valley Forge. But you might miss a really good story, about before he was president, and just miss that because you didn't read the whole thing. So can you use it? Yes. Do I find it to be as profitable as in nonfiction? No.
Great. Jay had a question about using this approach with books that are super technical. He's technical in depth and in length. He's looking to do a PhD, and so looking for, I think, practically, what does that look like?
I think you can use the same approach. I think what I find, depending on what you're doing, so if you're doing a PhD and you're having to look at people's dissertations and things like that, they're not always as well organized because they're not necessarily organized to read. But I think you can do that. You may have to do a little bit more mining on that, but I absolutely think that you can do that. And again, it's a little bit of, it might take you more time to do the mind map than it would for kind of a more popular, easy to read technical book. But I think that the time that you'll invest in the mind mapping, even in a book that's more complicated or lengthy, is going to pay itself off, because that book is still complicated and lengthy, and you're going to really kind of hone in and really focus on what you need to read rather than just all that you could read. And that is a challenge for some of us, right? Because some of us just really like to learn. And so part of the discipline, I think, for us in pastoral ministry is choosing significant over just what's next. And I think if we'll continue to focus in on what we need to learn, at the right time, I think that that's going to help us get the most out of our reading and not just turn around and found that we've read a bunch of books that actually aren't very applicable to where we are in ministry right now.
That's great. And another question, do you use PowerPoint or something similar while you're preaching?
I do not. I'm increasingly convinced that PowerPoint is becoming less effective in preaching. That I do believe that there is some things that are really powerful about sort of the visual medium. But I think the two things that we have to be careful of when we're using visuals, one is that they overpower the actual message. And I think we have to really wrestle with, I think, in preaching, why is it that God has seen fit to use the spoken word consistently throughout history? And so I think you have to that's a tension that you have to manage. I don't think it means you never use them. I just think it's a tension you have to manage. The other one is just the fact that we need to make sure that they're actually good. And the fact that we consume so much content that if you're up there using clip art from 1997, well, people are going to make a value judgment on the quality of the message based on the quality of your visual. So what I always had to wrestle with, and we worked with this for a little while, was the ability to do this in a way that was consistent. That meant that it had to be simple and sustainable enough, but the challenge with simple and sustainable is it going to be quality enough? And so I think different contexts, different churches, different tribes, if you will have different perspectives on that. But for me personally, at this point, we've just found it pretty effective for me to get up on stage. The only thing that we'll put on the screen behind us is the main point of our message, which we frame in a question and answer. And so like this last week, the question is, how do you know God's will for your life? And the answer was, you learn the will of God by relying on the word of God. And that's the only two things that people saw on the screen other than my name and my Twitter handle, so people could engage with me there. So that's it.
Awesome. I think that is all of the questions that we have for you so far. Thank you so much.
That's awesome. Well, so here's what I want to do is, as we kind of wrap this up, and we kind of walked into this saying I wanted to make sure I had you out of here by the top of the hour so we could honor and respect your time, is, again, one of the things that's happening with Preaching Rocket Next is that you're getting free content that's being sent to your email inbox. And so if you should have received some content last week, and so if you haven't done that, Russell, what do they need to do if they just haven't seen anything from us yet?
If they haven't done it, I just posted in the chat stream a link, and you can use that link for the first one, or for the first half of the deliverables this month, and then the second half will be emailed again to you as well. And if you ever don't get any of these things, or you're not receiving the some of the invites, or you think that you're missing things, you can always email at help@therocketcompany.com. I'll type that into the chat stream as well, and we can always get that to you also.
Yeah, so make sure that you're taking advantage of that. And guys, I don't work officially for the Rocket Company, but I am a performance coach. I work with a lot of pastors and church leaders. And so here's what I'd say about this opportunity that you have. Please, 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 please take advantage of the investment that you've made. I absolutely believe that your intent is to make the most out of this opportunity. I also know how crazy frantic pastoral ministry can get. And so my encouragement to you would be to honor the commitment that you made and to honor the investment that your church has made in you by allowing you to invest in this product, by showing up at these calls, by really consuming these resources and allowing it to get you where you want to go further and faster, okay? So make sure you're checking out the free deliverables. Make sure you're on these calls in the future. The next one, by the way, is Thursday, March 16th with Jeff Henderson. We're going to continue conversations about how you continue to grow in preaching. And so, again, that's why we're doing this, is because we want to help you kind of take what you learn through something like Preaching Rocket and take that to the next level. This should be more personalized, allow you more access to guys like Jeff and myself, and give you every opportunity to play the hand that God has given you. And so for me, this is an opportunity for you to make the most out of all that God's given you. And so that's why I'm really honored and privileged to have been part of our time here today. So thanks so much for being here. I appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you down the road soon. God bless you. Hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thanks so much, Matt. And just to let you guys know as well, we're going to be sending out a replay link and notes. So look in your inbox for that as well. So we covered a lot of material, and so for you guys to be able to watch it and go back through it at another time and to really be able to dig in and really use this stuff that Matt was able to talk through, look out for that in your inbox. And thank you again so much for being here. We'll see you in March.